When I think about the controversy that hunting seems to generate in society, and I stand at the back of this room and I look at the extraordinary humanness, the decency, the efforts of simply being civilized with one another, the care with which you take to make sure that you recognize those who make efforts with you and on your behalf, both within the association and within government. It really makes me wonder how in modern society this activity and those of us who participate in it can be classified and described in the way we often are. This is man's oldest and most successful try at life. For 99.99% of our existence, we live by virtue of the talents that people in this room have. There is not a person who lives in the heart of Vancouver, not a person who lives in a high-priced flat or condominium in Manhattan, not a person who lives in the rural sectors of Newfoundland or anywhere else in the world, who does not ultimately owe his or her existence to some successful hunter of the past. But even beyond this, we are dealing with a legal, highly regulated, science-based activity, not some kind of freak sideshow. This activity is supported by the greatest organizations in conservation that the world has, or has ever had. The World Wildlife Fund, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the United Nations' own environmental group, CITES, the Committee on the International Trade in Endangered Species, the FAO, the Federation of Agricultural Organizations of the United Nations. It is enshrined, the sustainable use of wildlife is enshrined in the very doctrines of the United Nations and the World Conservation Union. It is enshrined in the principles of the Convention on Biodiversity, to which every progressive nation in the world is a signature. This is not some freak sideshow. It is not unimportant. It is central to the conservation of nature and has been recognized by the most stringent scientific criticism in the world. When in Jeju, South Korea 2 years ago, we put forward a resolution to the IUCN supporting the sustainable use of wildlife around the world, we had to convince thousands of scientists from all across the world and the delegates from every country in the world that the sustainable use of wildlife could be, when properly applied, a conservation mechanism for wildlife. And we succeeded. How is it that it can be so frivolously attacked? How is it that people can ignore that the United Nations itself recognizes this activity as legitimate? How is it that we do not remind them? The countries of North America, Canada and the United States, at least the country of South Africa, the country of Namibia, I could name others. The very lifeblood of wildlife conservation has flowed through the veins of hunters and anglers. No, we are not alone. There are others who fight for the conservation of nature. But we have been there as stalwarts from the beginning. Secretary Jewell in the United States, Secretary of the Interior, announced just yesterday or the day before, $1.1 billion contributed by excise taxes, mostly on hunting and angling equipment and licensed sales for the conservation of wildlife in the American states. $1.1 billion. Let us name the group or groups or coalition outside of this that comes even close. It will be a short search and a shorter list. But let us not exaggerate what we do. Let us stick to the facts and not provide opportunity by exaggerating to those who wish to undermine what you do, your very businesses, your very lives, and the traditions of our nations. We might remind ourselves too, ladies and gentlemen, we might remind all governments, we might remind all members of the press that we live, fortunately, in a pluralistic democracy where legal activity is undertaken by a smaller group of people are not to be tread upon by either some fringe element or even by some majority. We protect many rights of many smaller groups, and we are a minority. How come this is never brought into this debate? Who would tell us? We who keep the oldest tradition alive, that we are somehow wrong. And it is a slippery slope. Yes, today it is the great bear. The great iconic bear, that magnificent creature that if we should ever lose him, would be like taking a piece of the soul from those wilderness areas. But when will it be the moose or the sheep? Who draws the line? What about your salmon? What about our cod? Don't they live? Don't they feel? Perhaps we can indeed just live on air. There is no conservation concern pointed out for the grizzly bear in this extraordinary place called British Columbia. As far as we know, the science says there is no conservation threat by legal fair chase hunting. This is the single most important issue to never let go. If there was, we should be the first to say no more. But there is not. The populations are healthy, as far as we understand, from extraordinarily capable scientists who work for your government. No, the data is not perfect, but no one claims that there is any imminent conservation threat to this great species. Let us not ever let the public of this province be led to believe otherwise. If you don't think it can go as far as the moose or the sheep, let me tell you, it can. And if we are not vigilant, it will. We will all be fine. But if you wish to pass these businesses that you have worked for, if you wish to pass, whether you are an outfitter or not, just a hunter, if you wish to pass that tradition on to your children and grandchildren, then understand one thing. The social context is changing. The world is a different place than it was. And the British Columbia of today will be the context in which a minister and a government will make their decisions, not in the vision of the past. No matter how much I wish for rural Newfoundland to be as she was, she has changed. So we ask our governments, we ask our ministers, we ask our secretaries, our congressmen, our senators, we ask them to stand for us. Well, I believe we do not do enough for them. When the hunting community stands so clearly and so firmly that no one can ever contest it, when every time we speak and articulate our passion, when every time we meet a man on the street or have a coffee with a friend or speak to anyone in our community, when the day comes that every one of our social interactions is articulated around the idea that those wild creatures, not just our hunting, but those wild creatures and the wild places they inhabit are the things we will not let go. When we are collectively recognized for that, then I suggest the job of ministers in governments will be a hell of a lot easier. Because in this great general public, as we like to describe it, there are only some extremists on either end, ours in quotation mark, or theirs. The majority are moderate, decent, considerate human beings who, if they believe we truly stand for those wild others that taught us to be human, they will be on our side. But if we give them reason to believe that our only interests are our own, they will march with the conviction